Venezuela's been in the news recently. There was an election where Maduro has claimed that they won the election. The opposition had more support, they argue, than ever before. And they're claiming they have the receipts to prove that they won this year's election. They should be the government in power. And that is, at this moment, not looking like it will happen. Maduro is under indictment in the United States for things like drug trafficking. He needs to stay in power, goes the narrative. We have two Venezuelans who work for us here at Nomad Capitalist. They both attended Bitcoin 2024, where they saw Donald Trump speak. Donald Trump actually posted on his social media an image of Nomad Capitalist at Bitcoin 2024. And when they went to fly back to Venezuela, the borders were closed under order of the current government to make sure that they could basically stay in power after this, what many are calling, rigged election. We've told you for years, obviously Venezuela has had a lot of problems, but we said, hey, it has gotten safer in some areas. There perhaps are opportunities for adventuring nomad capitalists. But I thought rather than us talking about Venezuela, we would have you hear from two people who right now are in Bogota, Colombia. Maria works with me on Nomad Capitalist Live, and she prefers to fly back to Bogota and then drive to her hometown on the Colombia-Venezuela border. She is staying with family right now. Javier works with our banking and our tax research, and he's a great speaker. He's on the Nomad Capitalist R&D channel. He lives in Caracas, and so he was actually diverted to fly to Bogota, where he's currently staying at my home. So first, let's hear from Maria, who does not live in the capital city, who lives on the border, where it is more of a rural experience. Talk about her experience being trapped outside of her own country.
Hello, I am Dr. Maria DeFrenza, Live Event Specialist at Nomad Capitalist. I'm Venezuelan, and I would like to tell you a little bit about what's going on. As many of you may know, this past Sunday, July 28th, were presidential elections in Venezuela. Edmundo Gonzalez represented the Democratic Party and Nicolás Maduro, the Socialist Party. The National Electoral Council announced that Nicolás Maduro won the presidential elections. The opposition state that they won and allegedly have electoral records from all polling stations to prove their victory, with 73.23% of the votes in favor of Edmundo Gonzalez. The Carter Center, an impartial observer, stated that Venezuela's electoral process did not meet international standards of electoral integrity. They concluded that the National Electoral Council's failure to announce results by polling stations constitutes a serious breach of electoral principles. Today, July 31st, the OAS, Organization of American States, united to vote on a resolution that sought to request the publication of the detailed results of the presidential votes in Venezuela and allow the presence of observers to guarantee the legitimacy. At least 18 votes were required to pass this resolution. 17 countries voted in favor, 11 against, and 5 countries abstained from voting. Nicolás Maduro is firm on his position in office. There are many civilians out on the streets protesting and participating in demonstrations nationwide, many of whom have been allegedly imprisoned and hurt, and there are claims that numerous table witnesses have gone missing. On July 28th, I was returning from the Bitcoin conference in Nashville, Tennessee to Colombia to then be driven home, but the border between Colombia and Venezuela was closed. At this moment, it's difficult for me to return to Venezuela with the uncertainty of the border and the manifestations blocking the roads. I have had many people concerned about my well-being and asking why I'm still in Venezuela. Like many countries, Venezuela is offering me opportunities that I am currently blessed to have and will continue to embrace and take advantage of. I live in Venezuela because I want to. I am a dual passport holder and obtained my Italian passport through citizenship by design, and I speak Italian very well. I have offshore bank accounts, and so having to prolong my stay in Colombia does not affect me because I have access to my bank accounts from anywhere in the world. Once the situation settles down, I can return home with very little to no inconveniences. My heart and soul go out to Venezuela, a place that has and will continue to grant me opportunities.
And now, Javier, who grew up in and lives in the capital city of Caracas, who's told us about some of the beautiful, wealthy neighborhoods in Caracas, who has talked on the Nomad Capitalist R&D channel about what it's like to live in Caracas. And perhaps you're not getting the full story if you watch Fox News or the BBC. Here's what Javier has to say, stranded outside of Venezuela.
Hello everyone, this is Javier Correa from the Nomad Capitalist Research and Development Team, and today I would like to share my personal experience as a Venezuelan who is currently abroad and who has been unable to return to his home country. Now, before I dive deeper into this topic, I would like to point out that Nomad Capitalist is not a political channel. Therefore, I will not be discussing any political opinions in this video, nor will I be discussing who won or did not win the elections. That is beyond the scope of this video. I will be merely stating facts of things that are going on in the country and how this can be analyzed from a Nomad Capitalist perspective. So, returning to the topic, both these gentlemen, Edmundo González Urrutia and Nicolas Maduro, claim that they have won the presidential elections that took place on Sunday. However, the National Electoral Commission of Venezuela has declared that Nicolas Maduro has won the election with 51% of the vote. From an international perspective, you have a clear divide between countries that were quick to confirm and ratify the results that were announced on Sunday, and they have clearly stated their support for President Nicolas Maduro. And on the other hand, you have countries that have indicated that further verification is needed to clearly determine what the real outcome of the Venezuelan presidential election was. And there is a subcategory within that group that basically has stated that they believe that Edmundo González Urrutia is actually the rightful victor of the Venezuelan presidential election. Now, in the former group, you will find countries like Turkey, Russia, China that have been traditional allies of the Maduro administration. Whereas in the latter group, you will find countries like the United States, the Kingdom of Spain, and several Latin American countries, including Argentina, that have openly expressed their support for Edmundo González Urrutia, or at least have indicated that they are not ready to recognize the results that were announced and that further verification is needed, as I stated earlier. Now, within this context of, geopolitical tension led to the Maduro administration suspending diplomatic ties with several Latin American countries, including Panama, the Dominican Republic, and Uruguay, among others. Now, as collateral damage to all of this, several airlines that fly between, for example, Panama and the Dominican Republic and Venezuela were unable to continue operating at least for a few days. And so therefore, all commercial travel between, for example, Panama and Venezuela has been suspended. I was in contact with my airline, and so basically I was flying back home. I was at the Bitcoin 2024 conference as part of the Nomad Capitalist delegation. I was actually the speaker for Nomad Capitalist at the Bitcoin 2024 conference, and I had a layover in Panama, and unfortunately I was told by the airline that my connecting flight to Caracas was suspended, and this is why I was, basically rerouted to Bogota. Now, what is going on internally is that obviously there are people who are unhappy with the current results that were announced, and therefore you're seeing protests, you're seeing civil unrest throughout Venezuela. Now, the intensity of these protests and of the civil unrest varies. There are some days where it is a bit more intense. There are some days where it is less intense. There is really no status quo that has been maintained, but needless to say that for those who are carrying on a on-the-ground physical business in Venezuela, these past few days have been tough from a commercial and from a business standpoint. The important thing is what happens in Venezuela affects you as a Venezuelan or as somebody who is doing business in Venezuela. And here's where the Nomad Capitalist element really comes in to show how this is a great example of how having a plan B, how having options from an immigration perspective, from a banking perspective, from a offshore corporate setup perspective, can really help you bulletproof yourself and insulate yourself from what may happen in your home country. And keep in mind, right now it's Venezuela, but in the future it may be another country. We've seen protests and civil unrest in countries where you have never have imagined, a few years ago. What do we talk about in here at Nomad Capitalist? We talk about getting second passports. We talk about getting digital nomad visas. We talk about getting Plan B back pocket residencies. And these are the types of situations where this comes in handy. So, for example, if you take a look at my personal experience, I have been able to remain outside of Venezuela with, I want to say, relative ease from an immigration perspective, because in spite of having just one passport at this time, I have visas. I have options to go to different countries and spend some time there. And that is really helped me a lot in this unexpected situation. In my case, as part of my plan, I'm currently pursuing Spanish citizenship by descent. My great-grandparents are from Madrid and from the Canary Islands. And apparently I may be eligible for a second passport by descent. And so I'm planning to pursue that to have more options, just in case something like this happens again. I will have the options to travel to other countries, to have more visa-free travel. From a banking perspective, we always talk about, having global banking, not being subject necessarily or completely dependent on what happens in your home country. And that is something that many Venezuelans do, and I'm included in that group. I have established offshore bank accounts in about 3 countries now. And this allows me to protect myself from what is currently happening in my country. I love my country. I live in my country, Venezuela, and I happily live there, but that doesn't mean I necessarily have to bank there. And that is something that comes very much with a nomad capitalist mindset, right? Where you live personally doesn't necessarily have to be where your money lives. And then third point, from an offshore corporate setup, by having companies and entities in different jurisdictions, not only do you safeguard your business operations if anything happens in your home country, but you also gain a substantial level of asset protection, right? One of the things we do here at Nomad Capitalist is help people and advise people on asset protection, like where is best to set up a trust, where is it best to set up an LLC, where is it best to set up an offshore corporation. And so these are the kinds of things that help you protect yourself from the instability that may take place in your own country. And keep in mind, right now I'm talking about Venezuela because it's my personal example. It's what I've been going through these past few days. But I remember back during the COVID years when Australians, for example, could not get back into their own country. I remember when Canadians were expressing concerns during the trucker protests, right? So this can happen to anyone at any time. And the important thing is, by having a nomad capitalist mindset, by having a nomad capitalist plan, you have insurance, you have an option to continue to operate regardless of what happens in your home country. You are protected. And that is the message that I want to convey to you today. Now, I would like to end on one note, which is, I've talked about Venezuela before in this channel, is what's happening right now in Venezuela, an indication that basically Venezuela is no longer an option. I don't believe that necessarily is the case. As Andrew Henderson has stated in previous occasions, I would agree with him. I think Venezuela is a market for more adventurous nomad capitalists, for people looking for higher risk and higher returns. It is always possible to do business there. It is always possible to invest there. As I have mentioned in my previous videos, I would caution against it if you don't have an appetite for risk. But, one thing does not necessarily exclude the other. And therefore, stay tuned for future videos on Venezuela. Stay tuned to, when I go back and to see how the situation continues to develop. Thank you all for watching. And, I hope to see you guys soon.
So those are 2 perspectives from 2 different people who work here at Nomad Capitalist. We have people who work with us in close to 24 countries. We have a network of vendors and experts all over the world. We like to keep our finger on the pulse of what's actually happening and not just rely on what you hear in your local news to define what happens in these countries. Venezuela certainly has a long way to go. It's the kind of country that someone who perhaps wants to make a more adventurous gamble can go and find opportunities. Right now, things are a bit astray, and so it's going to be a bumpy ride. But now you have it from 2 people who were actually there. This is, to me, why you want to have multiple passports, and it's why we've helped some of the people who work on our team get their second passport through Ancestry, for example. I'm in a car in Wales looking at Ancestry on my grandmother's side. We're filming a video on Welsh ancestry and citizenship by descent that you'll be seeing in the future. If you have access to a passport through your Ancestry, as some of our team members do, you probably want to claim that to make sure you're not locked out of a country, or at least you have a place to go if one of your countries does something that is not in your best interest. This is the kind of reason why you want to have second passports, because the people who have them have more options, and the people who don't are at the mercy of one government, which can change at any time. It wasn't that long ago that even people in Venezuela said, hey, this is a good country. We're making money. It can happen here. And it did.